Today would be one of those occasions that we could begin our homiletic discussion of the gospel lection with that time-worn setup. I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that our parables today teach us a few very important truths that will serve us this day and every day we draw breath. The bad news is that the meaning of these two parables, especially the first one, is confusing, often misunderstood and misapplied. Both parables are parables of the present kingdom. The first parable occurs only in St. Mark's Gospel, and it is the only parable of Mark's not recorded in St. Matthew's or St. Luke's Gospel. Interpreters have suggested that Matthew and Luke omitted this parable because it was too perplexing. When addressing the parable of the growing seed, that's sort of the latest name for it. This parable's had at least a half a dozen names as the time has gone along because none of them suited, so we continue to try to find one that works, and the parable of the growing seed's pretty close. It is easier and more productive to begin this talk by noting what the parable is not saying. Perhaps part of our lesson is to realize that not every parable is a compelling practical lesson, and that interpreters of these parables should be content to let the parable do its job without being forced. The parable does not instruct people about what they should or should not do, and therefore it should not be seen as addressing works righteousness or a psychologized address to the problem of workaholism, nor should it be viewed as an encouragement to passivity. It is not to be spiritualized into some growth hypothesis of spiritual life, and it is not about the power of preaching. What is it? It is a kingdom parable. I suppose we could agree that claims about the presence of the kingdom are no more compelling today than in the past, probably less so. But there are some individuals that may still know that despite all appearances, the kingdom process has already been set in motion and it will reach its goal. While you and I go about our daily routines, the kingdom is present and at work. And God's harvest with his judgment will certainly follow. We human beings do not bring in the kingdom. We are servants of the kingdom, not its cause. This parable illustrates the proper attitudes toward the kingdom and the end-time harvest. And here it is. The attitude is patience. It will come when God's time is ripe. The two other proper attitudes toward the kingdom that this parable illustrates are confidence. Despite all appearances, we have confidence because God is the one at work. And comfort. Comfort is another proper attitude toward this parable, we have comfort knowing that all is in God's hands. the fulfillment of the reign of God will surely come, since Jesus has already planted the seed. Well, then Mark, using one of his own favorite words, Mark then immediately adds what would be the third parable of this overall series. This time the reference is to the mustard seed. The main idea here is to draw a contrast between the seemingly insignificant beginnings and the outcome. What starts small may well grow to amazing proportions. The good news from Jesus will spread throughout the world until it reaches its fulfillment. Despite disagreement over details and whether the focus is really contrast or really growth, there is surprising agreement about the intent of this parable. Here, virtually unquestioned, we hear the voice of Jesus asserting a vital and central element of his eschatological work, his understanding of what God is doing to set things right in the world. Whatever else is debated, this parable pictures the presence of the kingdom in Jesus' ministry, even if others do not recognize it. If the kingdom is indeed present in his ministry, the obvious import, the obvious next questions are about one's stance toward the kingdom. Where do you stand with the kingdom in mind? If the mustard seed equivalence is making the case that the kingdom has come, it is also comfort and exhortation with regards to one's own identity. In other words, it is not only Jesus' ministry, or with Jesus' ministry, that things may look small and insignificant. We know it happened to him, and yet there were huge results. We see this dynamic later in the crucifixion, and it seems to be, if you think about it, sort of a regular practice of God. Like the cross, the mustard seed is a parable that is a challenge to human perception about judgment, or judgment about smallness and insignificance. It challenges our thoughts or our judgments about smallness and insignificance. Sometimes a challenge to human perception and judgment about smallness and insignificance is visible right here in the church, as well as all around us. We see through the glass darkly and too often fail to recognize a seed planted by God. To those of us who follow Jesus, we really should expect and implement mustard seed sort of thinking, neither disparaging insignificance nor doubting what God can do and does do with smaller beginnings. It is in Jesus' word and work that the kingdom has made its entrance. So, where does that put us? Well, we all know that everyone has various needs. Sometimes they are easily identified, and sometimes they're cleverly disguised and hard to really point out. Some psychologists have listed up to 140 different needs the human being seeks to fulfill. And most people would admit that these needs and desires are operating within us, helping us to determine our style of life and our pattern of behavior. Many of us many of us, were to some degree a part of what has been described as the now generation. You remember the words, the now generation? It's been a while. But anyway, the idea was, don't worry about the past. Oh, the future will take care of itself. Concentrate on today. Live for the day. The implication is that we are to enjoy the present moment and to take advantage of the many opportunities for pleasure offered to us by our society. And that may not be entirely fair, but we've discovered that there are some benefits and some good things about this way of thinking and living, and yet there could be a problem. We may begin to expect our needs to be satisfied immediately, in the present, now. And if those needs are not fulfilled now, we may experience undue frustration, a loss of an important perspective, the fact that today leads into tomorrow. Some of our needs are lifelong, and to fulfill them adequately takes a long time. But what we do today, how we face and react to those needs now, can contribute to the eventual satisfaction of those long-term desires. We may have to deal with some needs a little bit at a time. The parables in the 4th chapter of St. Mark's Gospel describe this same factor of patience. The establishment of the reign of God will not likely be soon completed. Not to expect it now would lead to a particular style of life. In other words, if we accepted the fact that it might not be here in the next few days, we might have a more patient style which would encourage the follower of Christ to actively participate in the bringing about the full flowering of the reign of Christ. It is the kind of patience that the parables try to inspire in believers, and it's the kind of active patience that can motivate us right here and right now. As we know, and do we ever, the universal church, near and far, is going through a tremendous and complex change. And of course, there are those people who want and expect these changes to take place faster. There are those who want them to take place slower. And there are those who don't want them at all. Division within the church can at times be healthy and can at times be destructive. In either case, it seems necessary to recall the message of those parables. The reign of God will surely come. Be patient amid all the setbacks, but continue to work for the fulfillment of his reign. We need a combination of patience in which we look hopefully to the future, and commitment by which we contribute to that future. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.